breakfast
on BBC Radio Stoke.
Stuart George, Katie O'Regan for Wednesday morning. It's the 29th of May. It's a week on since the attack in Woolwich, which shocked the nation as drummer Lee Rigby was killed in south-east London outside his barracks. The last 7 days have seen many communities condemn his death, but it's also seen a backlash on some members of the Muslim community and mosques. But how about locally? Joining us this morning is Mohammad Farak, a local Muslim who organised an exhibition on Islam 2 months ago in Stoke-on-Trent. Good morning, thank you for coming in.
Good morning.
Does it upset you that the action of two people seems to taint a whole community in this country?
Most definitely, I think that's how the Muslim community feels, and it doesn't help the way that it's reported. I mean, last week I remember hearing the news, and it started off with an incident in Woolwich. It quickly grew into, suspected Muslim extremists to a full-blown terror attack against, the whole of England. And that's how it sort of very quickly built up. And, that obviously, it taints everybody with the same brush, unfortunately.
Do you not see it as an act of terrorism, then?
It depends on which angle you're looking at it from. I mean, ultimately, to me, it looks like two people went out there for whatever reasons. I think they made their reasons quite clear in the end. That became evident through some of the videos. Went out there and committed an act of murder, and they should have been dealt with through the law and treated like anybody else that murdered any innocents across the world. But it seems that as soon as a Muslim is responsible for something, that it suddenly turns into an act of terrorism and so on and so forth. Now, in Islam, the killing of innocents is forbidden, whether it be here in London, or whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Iraq, or whether it be in Afghanistan or Pakistan with the drone attacks. These are innocent lives that are being lost.
And yet, anyone I've ever spoken to about Islam talks about how it's a very peaceful way of life. And yet we keep seeing things highlighted which suggest that might not be the case.
Right. I think this is one of the things that is failing both from the papers and from the government, who keeps denying its foreign policy, and also from members of our own community who, immediately something like this happens, they suddenly start to apologise, they suddenly start to say Islam is peace and start to condemn these things. Now, there's two aspects to it. One is, what are you apologising for? By actually going out there and apologising, condemning before you even know the facts, you're actually exasperating that assertion that it is to do with Islam. Okay, which it's not. And secondly, when you come out and you shout, Islam is peace, well, actually, most people who have now just witnessed this on the media and, have been part of the media hype now, don't believe that narrative. I think we need to have an open, honest discussion about our beliefs with the wider community, our neighbours, our colleagues. This is one of the reasons I did the exhibition, so that people can come and ask those questions, because, yes, Islam is about peace, but it's also a way of life that talks about war as well.
And so, looking at what has happened, a week on, what are people in the community, in the Muslim community in and around North Staffordshire saying about it?
A lot of people are very frustrated. Obviously, because of what's happened, it's quite shocking to the community, the videos. But I think we need to look at what is it those people, because I think we've been here before. After 7/7, the videos were released, and these people said, look, it's foreign policy. But the government is not willing to address that issue. Rather, it wipes that suggestion away completely and says, no, it's to do with these individuals, or it's to do with Islam, it's to do with something else, but not that. And so people are frustrated on the one hand, but also see the double standards and the hypocrisy on the other hand, that when a Muslim commits an act of murder like this or whatever, then suddenly it's blown out of proportion. An elderly gentleman, as you're aware, was recently attacked and killed, a Muslim gentleman coming back from a mosque. Now, that was not labelled as terrorism. Locally in Stoke-on-Trent, two men tried to blow up the mosque locally here. That was not an act of terrorism. Following this incident, a mosque was petrol bombed, and many things have happened since then, but these are not acts of terrorism. They're reported completely different. So the Muslim community sees these double standards, and it sees that, look, when British troops are in Afghanistan, etc., and I mean, this morning I was reading about a soldier that killed 9 children in their sleep and then burned their bodies. But we don't hear of this on the news.
Well, something we have heard of the news, and you've mentioned foreign policy several times this morning, so we'll pick you up on this. This idea that it seems that British soldiers may have had something similar to Guantanamo Bay in Afghanistan, and they may be holding people there who have no access to any kind of solicitors, no right to reply or anything, and they're detaining people without them having anywhere to go. What is it about British foreign policy that leads some people to become, the way it's described these days, is radicalised, isn't it? Is that actually fueling radicalisation?
Most definitely. I think if we look in the past, the former MI5 chief, she delivered a devastating critique about the invasion of Iraq a couple of years ago, and she said it substantially increased the threat of terrorist attacks in Britain and was a significant factor behind the radicalisation of young Muslims in the UK. So certainly it is definitely a factor in it. Now, and I think it's reasonable to sort of assume that, look, if we go into other countries, or if any country invades another country, then there's going to be a backlash on that. And especially when it comes to places like Iraq, when there was really, I think in everybody's eyes now understand there was no justification for it. I think it was motivated more by economics and oil rather than the other factor.
One point that you made about the way that the Muslims are portrayed and Islam is portrayed in Britain is this whole notion of it being a religion, a way of life, I think, because it's very much a way of life as well as a religion, isn't it? That actually it does talk about war. There's mention of jihad, for example, as potentially a holy war and things that can or can't be fought for. Does that sit comfortably with the way historically British culture has been?
I think that the difference is that when it comes to religion, Britain is secular. It's a secular society now, and its history with religion has not been a pretty history. Whereas in Islam, our beliefs and our religion and our way of life has always been a source of inspiration, a source of development and technology, and drives us that way. So I think there's a big difference. But when it comes to, for example, jihad, it's not necessarily, as we described it, a holy war, but because it's a way of life, and I think this is where people sort of suddenly spout out peace. No, but actually it's a way of life. It tells you how to deal in peaceful times, and it tells you also how to act and deal with those people who are waging war against you, if you like, and etc. So I mean, in this country we have what we call foreign policy, which part of that is diplomacy, and part of that is if the diplomacy fails, you go to war. In Islam we have a very similar situation whereby you discuss with people, you invite people to the table to discuss and etc., and you try your best through discussions. And if that fails, then there's no other resort but to go to war as well. So, like I say, Islam is not a peaceful religion, as most people spout out and completely deny any aspect of, there being allowed fighting to defend yourself or to protect others is allowed. And if we just come out there and say peace, and don't actually have a proper discussion on it, then unfortunately the media will get away with, and certain government agendas will get away with fooling the people into discussing into this idea that it's about Islam and Islam is the problem, as opposed to recognising and bringing to the table the real discussion about foreign policy and the effects it's having all over the world.
If Muslims don't like British foreign policy, why not live somewhere else?
Well, I mean, I think here again that assumption sort of means that it's just Muslims. I think, the war in Iraq, when 2 million people came onto the roads, that was not just Muslims. There's a great many people who see the difference between justice and injustice. And to point that just at Muslim problem, the part of the problem is that if a Muslim says certain things, then they expect that there's going to be a backlash on them, whereas this should be part of our right to express our ideas and our opinions on things like foreign policy. But it seems that when a Muslim wants to express their opinion, they're either hushed up or made to feel as though you somehow don't deserve to be here or belong here.
If you met someone who'd been radicalised, what would you say to them?
I'd sit them down and have a chat to them. But then equally, if I met a member of the EDL, I'd invite him to the table, get out a cup of tea or the biscuit and say, okay, let's discuss this. Because when it comes down to idea for idea, Muslims are not shy of discussing any aspect of Islam. We're rather proud of being Muslim and what we believe, because it makes sense. It's the best way of life, and so therefore, why should we be shy about that? But what we don't accept is just simple labelling on people. And one of my fears as a result of this action that's happened recently in Woolwich is that practicing Muslims are going to be labelled, and unfortunately it seems as though being practicing leads to views which are not compatible with British foreign policy, which then somehow are linked to violence, as though this is a stream that people go to. Just because a Muslim starts to practice, somehow their views are going to start becoming violent. Is
talking about the Muslim community helpful or not?
Not in this context. I think that every community has problems, and there's good and bad in all sorts, but it just again seems that when a Muslim takes a certain action, right or wrong, that suddenly the whole Muslim community gets painted with that. And I'd say the same with, it's as though, if I came to you and said, look, condemn what Jimmy Savile did, well, do you think, well, why should I? Well, what's it got to do with me? I'm not responsible for that person's actions. So I don't see why Muslim imams and leaders and groups suddenly came out into the TV and suddenly started apologising for something they were not responsible for.
But when things, I was going to use the word atrocities, which is a very loaded word, and it's a very media word, isn't it? It's like certain people can commit atrocities and other people can't, which is kind of the point you're making. But when things happen, as we've seen in the last week or so, which appear, rightly or wrongly, appear to be done in the name of Islam, how do you get round that? As a Muslim, how do you say that this isn't to do with me, and either condemn it or agree with it, but actually don't label an entire group of people by one or two people's actions, when they're saying it's in the name of what you believe in?
Well, obviously, like I said before, killing innocent people is condemned in Islam. It's not allowed in Islam. But any type of atrocity that happens, or anyway, I don't see why Muslims, when it's quite obvious that this is not from Islam, why Muslims should have to come out and say it's not from Islam. And unfortunately, we find people too quick to jump onto that bandwagon and suddenly start to declare themselves innocent. Well, I don't have to declare myself innocent about nothing because I'm not guilty about anything.
What do you make of the graffiti on the Bomber Command Memorial, which just had Islam sprayed on it in red paint?
Well, to be honest, no. Other than what you've just said, that's all I've heard. There's no suggestions to say who it was, why it was, and obviously, to me, again, it's a criminal act to deface anybody else's private property or personal property. So, again, there's a law there to take care of that.
How much could each of us do then, as members of British society, Muslim or non-Muslim? What can we do to understand each other better? You've had this exhibition, for example, which I suppose is one step. One practical change we could all make in our lives that would help us understand each other.
I think I would give the advice that don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask them sincerely. I mean, the people can tell when you're asking a sincere question or where you're there just to simply mock and cause an issue. So ask questions. But even in our Muslim community, I would say to the Muslim community, open up your doors, invite your neighbours in, the mosques. I mean, this is one of the reasons we did the exhibition. Unfortunately, the mosque was not ready. Maybe next year. It should be ready soon. But open the doors and let people come in, ask those discussions. And I think it's important that those discussions are had. And views are aired and grievances are aired within the community. Unfortunately, those discussions are not happening in our mosques because our mosques are too afraid because policemen are standing at the door, unfortunately, or regularly visited by the police or members of the MI5 and so on to make. So mosques are afraid to entertain any discussions, real discussions. So unfortunately, those discussions are going underground. By those type of people that want to, commit these type of actions.
I wish we could talk more, but time is against us. Thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating meeting you. Thanks very much. Mohammad Farak with us on BBC Radio Stoke. He set up an exhibition a couple of months ago in Stoke-on-Trent about Islam. It's 21 minutes past 8.